Hello, and a warm welcome to my regular listeners and those joining us for the first time. Thank you for being here. I'm Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist, passionate about the deep connection between psychology and spirituality. For too long, these fields have viewed each other with suspicion. It's ironic. Healthy psychology strengthens our spirituality, and true spirituality, rooted in solid psychological health, offers profound meaning and resilience in our lives. In this short podcast, I explore the gospel reading for the coming week. It's a source for preachers preparing homilies, as well as anyone teaching or studying Scripture. I encourage my listeners who want more to listen to earlier podcasts. I draw from psychology articles, Scripture scholarship, and anthropological insights to make the Gospels relatable in today's world. I see the Scriptures as guides for faith and spirituality. Biblical writers viewed history differently from modern historians. The Bible is more than just another history book. The texts are richly layered, addressing spirituality, identity, and faith. There's always more wisdom to uncover. If this podcast is meaningful to you, please support the podcast by subscribing. Feel free to ask a question or make a comment. I love the conversation. Sharing the podcast with friends and family who are interested in growing in their faith and spirituality is appreciated. And if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd like to do a special shout out today to my listeners in Singapore. Thank you for joining us. In today's edition from Luke chapter 24, we hear about two disciples on a walk from Jerusalem to a village 7 miles away called Emmaus. While it seems like an innocent walking excursion, there is so much going on. We gain insight into the early days of the church. Two of his disciples are discussing what happened in Jerusalem just a few days ago. We know one of them is Cleopas, but the other remains nameless. I'm not sure why. We don't know the purpose of their visit. Perhaps they wanted to leave Jerusalem to get away from all the pressures and confusion they had experienced. The situation suddenly becomes very interesting when they are joined by what appeared to be a very uninformed stranger. The stranger admits his lack of knowledge, and the two travelers take it upon themselves to educate the stranger about Jesus and his crucifixion. The roles soon get reversed, and it is the stranger who ends up educating the two disciples. The stranger ends up being Jesus. But before he is revealed, he explains to the disciples about the prophecies found in Scripture and about his mission. The disciples are impressed and invite him to stay. They break bread together, and there is an immediate and obvious link to the Eucharist. And it is only at this point that their eyes are opened to recognize Jesus. For reasons that are still not obvious, Jesus disappears. This action is quite different from his usual appearances, where he says at least a few words and imparts a brief teaching. It's obvious this is not needed in this experience. The burning in their hearts symbolizes a profound spiritual awakening, not physical discomfort, but a warm, compelling zeal from divine truth. It evokes joy, enlightenment, and purified belief, like a refining fire that burns away doubt. People missing obvious information is not new. Inattentional blindness is a term for when someone fails to notice an obvious stimulus in their environment due to their focused attention elsewhere. This psychological phenomena occurs because the brain filters out unexpected or unattended details amid overwhelming stimuli. No doubt the disciples probably lacked sleep, and they were certainly distracted and focused on the past events as they struggled to make sense of all that they had experienced. They were focused on the past. I'm not blaming them for this. It makes perfect sense, and they needed to process their traumatic experience. Yet, I must point out again that about what I spoke about last week. When we focus only on the past or future, we miss the present moment. The good news is that they did finally recognize Jesus. It's worth noting that even though they cognitively did not recognize Jesus, their hearts intuitively responded. I'd like to focus on the statement that the disciples recognized that their hearts burned within them. Their intuition recognized Jesus for who he is. This statement poetically reminds us that while it's important to have knowledge of Scripture and even theology, we also need to pay attention to what is going on in our hearts, to discern the will of God and to grow in our spirituality. Classical and modern literature often portrays burning hearts love through metaphors of fire and flame. For example, Romeo and Juliet are describing as burning in their mutual desire, with their passion so consuming that it overcomes family hatred. Mystical writers like Rumi speak of the heart burning with love, and some Christians, spiritual writers, extend this image to the marital bond, describing spouses whose hearts are on fire for each other as a reflection of divine love. These disciples on the road to Emmaus clearly loved God, and it is their love for God that allowed them to finally recognize Jesus. Next, Jesus is recognized when the disciples gather to share a meal together. This moment beautifully underscores a core element of our spirituality, which is community. The very first recorded miracle of Jesus, the wedding feast of Cana, found in John chapter 2, verse 1 to 11, tells of Jesus changing 6 stone water jars into wine. It's important to note that Jesus was not alone. He was accompanied by his mother and 3 other disciples. In other words, his community. One of the first acts of Jesus was to call the disciples and build community. I'm reminded of Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where he writes, "For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, I am with them." Jesus offers profound guidance on community living throughout the Gospels. Here's a quick look at key passages. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, he declares, "I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it," introducing his enduring assembled community. Matthew chapter 18, verse 15 to 20, provides steps for resolving disputes among believers, along with the church's authority to bind and to loose. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 25 to 28, Jesus contrasts worldly rulers who dominate others with his followers who are lead through humble service. Greatness comes from being a servant. Matthew chapter 23, verse 8 to 12, warns us against titles that elevate some above others. All are brothers and sisters under one teacher, the Messiah, with the greatest among them serving. Finally, John chapter 13, verse 34 to 35, gives the new command, "Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this everyone knows that you are my disciples." The disciples, upon recognizing Jesus, returned to Jerusalem, despite the fact that they had spent most of the day on the road to Emmaus. They wanted to share their experiences with their community. They were very much operating in the present moment now. Thank you for joining me. Next Sunday, April 26, 2026, we'll be reflecting on John chapter 10, verse 1 to 10, that addresses the ministry of Jesus as the shepherd. There is a twist. The gospel focuses on the sheep's response to the shepherd as a metaphor for Christians following their Lord. New episodes are released every Sunday for the following week's gospel. Big thanks to Heather Patel Doherty and Richard Coulombe for their wonderful help. Questions or comments? Please email me at peter.doherty, that's DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. May God richly bless you all.